I ended my last video showing the mechanics of the table working nicely, and we were very excited. But I ran into an issue. The bearing, as shown in this arrow, has a lot of weight on it. And there's, I believe that there's 12 of these blocks that have a bearing that rides on that piece of wood. And the problem is there's a lot of drag on the wood, and it already started to leave a little bit of a groove, as you can see here. It was also a problem when it rotated, that it rotated over this bracket that we put on to hold the skirt up. The whole key for having bearings that this whole system rides on is to alleviate drag. And quite frankly, the bearings riding on the wood was creating drag and creating a problem in regards to the groove in the wood where the bearings were riding. So in an effort to make sure that there were no more grooves and that the bearings would not stick at all in the slots for the skirt brackets, I decided to get on the CNC machine and cut out a channel that would go all the way around the circumference of the guide plate, and the bearings would ride, and it would be metal to metal. And the way I was able to do it was I made it wide enough to where the bearing could ride on the outside, and I could put screws on the inside to hold it. It turned out actually just perfect. As you can see, it goes all the way around the guide plate, and more importantly, covers the skirt bracket. It made it run so much smoother. Now, in doing all this, I started doing some level measuring, and we came to find out that the outside of the guide plate all the way around, after I'd had the mechanical on it, had sagged about 1/4 of an inch all the way around the outside. Obviously unacceptable, because I know how difficult it's going to be to get the linear bearings and rails to be exactly level from the inside to the outside. So I had to try to figure out what it was that I was going to do to make it so it didn't sag. So I came up with an idea and got 1.5 by 1.5 aluminum square tube, cut this portion out of the tube. I put a little jig on the welding table with a piece of 1 by 1 square tube to make sure it stayed straight, and a couple of clamps, and welded it up. A lot of you are going to say that's horrible welding, and I'm going to say you're exactly right. But then I'm going to say that's beautiful grinding, and you would be exactly correct. It is beautiful grinding. It turned out quite nice, and nobody would know what a bad welder I am. Once I had these 3-foot pieces in place and welded, I put them in place with a 1/2 inch piece of aluminum. It was 14 by 14 inches square, and I had to put them in. And you're going to see that they're offset. They had to be offset because on the inside, as you can see there, I had to deal with the star lift mechanisms and the rotation. So the braces had to be very strategically placed not to hit the lift mechanism when it rotated. That took a bit of doing, but I finally got it all in place and bolted it down with some pretty hefty bolts, cut the pieces of wood out of the stand, and put it into place. And as you can see, the bottom portion where we welded was 8 inches back, so people wouldn't bang or scratch themselves on the support system that was in place. And they turned out pretty nice. The next item on the list was to start the skirt. I've been dreading it from the very beginning because the way the guy had it in the plans was just not really feasible to have a very straight and concise cut and make it work. So I went on to the CNC and started cutting out a 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood, a number of pieces to glue up, 50 pieces to be exact. CNC made good, quick work of it. Again, I'm so happy for the vacuum hold down system and the vacuum system to pick up chips. It worked out great. So once I got them cut out, it was just a matter of cleaning them up, sure they were ready to glue up. And once they were ready to glue up, I built a little jig with some clamps and a square and started gluing them up. I would put one in place, glue the next one as best I could, and I just kept going. And once I got one on, I would make sure that they were square, and then I would tighten up the clamp and then clamp them hard together, get the gun, nail them all in place, and I'd start over. And they turned out pretty nice. I ended up making a total of 6 of these skirt pieces. Now, once the skirt pieces were made, it was time, really for me, it was a very difficult piece in making sure that the mechanism was going to work, and that was making sure that the grooves on the inside of these skirt pieces were perfect. So as you can see here, I built a jig, and I got them measured so that I could place each one of these skirt pieces in the jig in the exact same location, and then I put the CNC to work. It did everything I wanted it to. It cut out the precise location for the bearings to roll on. It just turned out really nicely. There's the finished product. And so once I had those 6 all in place and cut, so once they were all done, it was time to glue it up. And I got 3 2x4s and cut them and curved the ends to the exact diameter that the skirt was supposed to be. Put them in place and then glued them up and strapped them all together and ratcheted them until they were good and tight. And during the whole process, I checked the measurement very carefully to make sure that I had met the inside diameter needs, because that's a very close tolerance. So once I did that and got everything else in place, I decided to go ahead and line all of the grooves in sheet metal. So I went to the CNC machine and started cutting metal that I would need to line the grooves so that I would not have any drag. So these particular ones are the ones that go in the groove vertically, up and down. And then the next set was the portion that the bearing actually rode on the top, and each one of them have little wings. So I was able to bend the tabs so that I could attach the liners to each portion of the skirt, and also bent the other tabs so that I could spot weld these pieces to the vertical. And here's what they turned out like. The other thing that you can see here is that I also installed sheet metal for the bearings that go up and down. The only way I was able to work on them all and keep everything lined up was to put a chair in the middle and kind of rotate the piece around. It worked out quite nicely. So one of the great things about having the internet and the communications that we have now is you find people that are all over the world doing kind of the same stuff you're doing. And it just so happens that a gentleman from Canada, his name is Laurent, I hope I pronounced it right. Laurent is a true woodworker. I mean, the guy's awesome. Got in touch with me, and we have struck up a friendship, and he does absolutely fabulous work. And this is his skirt. He does not have a CNC machine, so he figured out another way to do it, and it was ingenious. So here's his skirt, perfectly round to meet the guide plate, and the way that he did it was he had the guide plate up on its stand, and then he put a piece of wood all the way around to meet the gap that we were supposed to have between the guide plate and the skirt. So he put a piece the exact size all the way around and tacked it to this piece. And then he took pieces of plywood and layered them. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4 different levels of plywood that he put on, and he glued them up and strapped them all the way around until he got the exact measurement necessary in thickness. And he had the inside that was just perfect to the guide plate. I mean, it's just brilliant. But the real question in my mind was going to be, how in the world are you going to do the guide slots on the inside once it's done? Well, the guy's a genius. This is a little video he sent me of, he took a 1/4-inch piece of balsa wood and got all the measurements on it and cut it into place and got everything done. And being balsa wood, he was able to curve the wood on the inside of the unit, just like this. He curved it on the inside, and then he took a router. It was this particular router with a bit and a bearing, and he cut it all out. And it turned out just perfectly. You can see here, he has it on a workbench high this time, and you can see that he's cut out every single slot all the way around, measured perfectly. The guy is money. He just knows how to do things really right. A couple other pictures that he sent. So you know how I did metal on the inside of the slots. He was wise enough to just resin the slots. So he resined all the slots, hardened them up so it will roll much better on than just straight on the wood. And here is where the guy is he just shines. This is his base. Are you kidding me? Look at this thing. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And he did it so that mine was to plans. He did his, and he has these pieces out far enough to where he's not going to have the problem of droop on the outside. Here's another picture of it. Look how beautiful it is. Just absolutely gorgeous. And of course, to top it all off, he did 12 beautiful chairs to match his table that go all the way around. And he's been nothing but help for me. It's been really good to be able to bounce ideas and share stuff with him.